The Syrian Arab Golan will remain Syria forever. The Golanians will wait for the moment when this occupied part of Syria returns with the Israeli war machine. It occupied it in 1967 and displaced its population, which today reached about 700,000 people.
From the west, the Golan Heights overlooks Lake Tiberias and the Marj al-Hula in there, Galilee, while in the east it forms the Wadi al-Rakkad, which extends from the north near Turanna, southward to its estuary in the Yarmouk River, defined as separating the Golan from the Golan and Damascus. To the north is the Wadi Sar Valley at the slopes of Jabal al-Sheikh, the northern border of the Golan, extending from Banias from the sources of their Jordan River to the upper reaches of the Valley of the East. The southern border is formed by the winding course of the Yarmouk River and the separation between the Golan Heights and the Ajlan Plateau in Jordan. The Golan is 50 kilometers west of Damascus. The total area is estimated at 1,860 square kilometers and extends 74 kilometers from north to south, with a maximum width of 27 km.
This week marks the 50th year of the Israeli occupation of the Syrian Golan, a period which has had a catastrophic impact on the lives of the native Syrian population. Following the Israeli occupation in 1967, over 130,000 native Syrian inhabitants approximately 95% of the population were forcibly transferred or displaced from their homes. The Israeli military began a widespread campaign to demolish their homes, destroying 340 villages and farms. These were replaced by Israeli agricultural settlements. The first within a month of the 1967 war, often using the same stones from their destroyed villages and farms. In 1981, Israel enacted the Golan Heights law, which purported to annex the territory into the State of Israel, an illegal action condemned by the UN Security Council as null and void and without international legal effect. Today, there are at least 23,000 Israeli settlers in the occupied Syrian Golan, living in 34 illegal settlements. Together with the Israeli military and authorities, they control 95% of the land. The remaining native Syrian population is approximately 25,000 who live in 5 villages located in the far north of the occupied Syrian Golan, and who control just 5% of the land. Meanwhile, those displaced or forcibly transferred from the occupied Syrian Golan and their descendants number approximately 500,000, and mainly live in their outskirts of Damascus and the southern city of Daraa. Given the current conflict in Syria, many of these people have become internally displaced persons, IDPs, for a second time in their lifetime, or refugees. Due to the Israeli occupation, the remaining Syrian population in the occupied Syrian Golan suffer daily violations of their basic human rights. Discriminatory land and housing policies mean that the 5 remaining Syrian villages are severely overcrowded, as expansion on surrounding land is rarely permitted. Building without permission can incur large fines or the full or partial demolition of their building. Not only do these policies have an adverse effect on available housing, they also severely inhibit the improvement of road and sewage systems, the construction of education, health and cultural institutions, and the establishment of infrastructure for industrial areas. The health and living conditions of the Syrian population are further threatened by the presence of landmines and Israeli military bases in Syrian residential areas, often within just a few meters of people's houses and where their children play. Since 1967, it is estimated that at least 66 Syrians have been victims of landmines in the occupied Syrian Golan. Among these, 16 died, half of whom were children. Despite efforts to force Israeli nationality on the remaining native Syrian population following their purported annexation of the occupied Syrian Golan, today, the overwhelming majority of their Syrians continue to reject Israeli citizenship. Instead, they hold a form of permanent residency status while their nationality is categorized as undefined. This status causes significant uncertainty and difficulty. It may be revoked if an individual's center of life changes or if citizenship of another country is obtained. Since 1982, around 100 Syrians have had their permanent residency status revoked following travel and residency abroad. This status means that Syrians are only awarded an Israeli laissez-passer document, which creates onerous restrictions and costs for international travel. Meanwhile, the Israeli authorities, Israeli settlers and private companies, both Israeli and international, illegally benefit from occupied Syrian Golan's abundant natural resources. Its fertile soil and water resources have led to the development of a substantial Israeli settlement industry, which includes beef, vegetable, fruit, wine and mineral water production. At least 14 wineries operate out of illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied Syrian Golan, and many vineyards also supply grapes to wineries in Israel. Further, since 2013, an Israeli company Afek Oil and Gas has been conducting oil exploration in the occupied Syrian Golan, proudly claiming that the region contains billions of barrels of Israeli oil. Afek is owned by Genie Energy, a U.S. company that includes Rupert Murdoch, Dick Cheney and James Woolsey on its advisory board. Meanwhile, the Israeli government is using the current conflict in Syria to further cement its hold on their occupied Syrian Golan, with increased rhetoric being matched by settlement expansion and natural resource exploitation. This Tuesday, Prime Minister Netanyahu, speaking at a conference in an illegal settlement in the occupied Syrian Golan, stated that the Golan Heights will forever remain under Israeli sovereignty. "We will never leave the Golan Heights. It's ours." The leader of the main opposition party, Isaac Herzog, also present at the conference, made similar statements. After 50 years of military occupation, it is imperative that the international community not only reject such rhetoric but take concrete measures to protect the rights of the Syrian population under occupation. International law is clear that the occupied Syrian Golan is part of Syria. Israel must respect all international resolutions relevant to the occupied Syrian Golan and comply with its obligations enshrined in international human rights and humanitarian law conventions. Crucially, the right to self-determination of all Syrians from the Golan both those under occupation and those forced to leave and their descendants, must be respected so they alone can decide on their future.
The first Israeli settlement, Merom Golan, was established in the Golan within just 1 month of the 1967 war. Shortly after the war, various delegations of Israeli experts, including civil engineers, rural planners, agricultural advisors and hydrologists, visited the Golan to evaluate its potential, particularly to find ways Israel could profit from the area's abundant natural resources. An early project was the development of Mount Hermon. In 1968, Israel's Nature Reserves Authority informed this development project involved designating the main Syrian village on the mountain slopes, Jabhat Ezit, a military zone, and then destroying it. The village's population of at least 1,500 people was forcibly transferred and forbidden from returning. An Israeli settlement, Neve Atif, described by the Lonely Planet as the closest thing Israel has to a Swiss alpine village, was built on the ruins of Jabhat Ezit. Since the occupation began, Mount Hermon, and the Golan in general, have become a popular destination for Israeli tourists. The Golan received 150,000 visitors in 1968, increasing to 500,000 during the 1970s, and reaching approximately 1.5 million in 2005. Advertisements encourage Israelis to spend a weekend in the Golan so they can feel like being in Europe while remaining in Israel. Tourism is a staple of the settlement economy in the Golan. The Israeli government and businesses promote the area's natural beauty as a site for hiking, camping, biking, horseback riding, outdoor sports, sightseeing, wine tasting, and picking fruit. Travel websites that advertise accommodation in the Golan list a plethora of rural guest houses, cabins, bed, all either located in settlements or owned by settlers. Exploitation of agriculture and water. Aside from its natural beauty, the Golan has fertile soil and abundant water resources. As a result, a substantial agricultural industry has developed in Israeli settlements that includes beef, vegetable, fruit, wine, and mineral water production. In 2009, the revenue generated by agriculture produced in the Golan was estimated at $143 million. Major businesses in the territory include the Golan Heights Winery and Eden Springs, Eden Mineral Water, based in Katzrin Settlement, population 8,000, their largest settlement in the Golan and considered the settlement capital. Katzrin was built over the destroyed Syrian villages of Kasrin, Shkef, and Sanoba. In October 2016, the Israeli Finance Ministry approved plans for the construction of 1,600 new settlement units in Katzrin. This follows an announcement in 2015 that the Israeli government would encourage 100,000 new settlers to move to the Golan over the next 5 years. Katzrin is also close to one of the sites Israel has illegally authorized for oil exploration. Their exploration is being conducted by an Israeli company, Afek Oil and Gas, which is owned by Genie Energy, a U.S. company that has Rupert Murdoch, Dick Cheney, and James Woolsey, their former head of the CIA, on its advisory board. The Syrians of Golan, due to discriminatory land, housing, and development policies, the Golan's 5 remaining Syrian villages have been unable to expand outwards and are severely overcrowded. It is close to impossible for the native Syrian population in the Golan to obtain building permits, forcing them to build homes without permits in order to meet their housing needs. Consequently, Syrian homeowners risk having their homes destroyed. In 2016, the home of Bassem Ibrahim, in their Syrian village of Mastal Shams, was demolished by Israeli authorities. Currently, there, Syrian owners of between 80 to 90 houses have been notified that their homes are due to be demolished. On top of all this, under the guise of the Hermon National Park plan, Israeli authorities are seeking to appropriate 20,000 acres of land used since Ottoman times by the residents of Majdal Shams and Ain Kinya for agriculture and housing. If approved, the Herman National Park Pinewood, in particular, surround Majel Shams in the north and west. Zionist ideology in essence is the policy of colonization settlement based on the occupation of Arab land and cleansing of its original inhabitants and the construction of settlements and the call of Jewish settlers and resettlement. Zionist acts and practices are often associated with changing the landscape in the territories they occupy, thus destroying the spatial and residential space, so that over the years it becomes difficult to identify the destroyed sites, whether they are cities, villages or other landmarks. In 1967, the leaders of the Zionist organization and Israel recognized their destruction of the villages in Palestine. In his speech to the Technion students in Haifa, in 1969, Moshe Dayan declared that the Jewish villages were built on the ruins of the Arab villages. You cannot even know the names of these villages. I do not blame you because the geography books no longer exist. Not only the books no longer exist, the Arab villages are not there either, he told the students. The first leaders of the Zionist organization were especially important to the Golan, as they were always at the heart of their plans, because it was rich in water, fertile land, as well as its privileged location. The Golan is located in the southwest of Syria, a transit point between the countries of the Levant, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon and Jordan. To the north is Lebanon, from the west to Palestine and the Jordan Valley, from the south to Jordan and the Yarmouk Valley. The Golan Heights are strategically important because of their unique location and diversity. The Golan overlooks the regions of South Lebanon, Jalil, Al-Hula, Tiberias and their northern Jordan Valley, and falls to more than 200 meters below sea level in their Al-Balitha area in the south on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Above sea level, the highest peak in Mount Hermon. The Golan is characterized by abundant sources of water, such as rivers and springs that are constantly going on, in addition to groundwater. This is due to the fall of abundant amounts of rain, which is increasing in abundance and turning into snow as we head north towards the area of Mount Sheikh. The average rainfall in the south of the Golan is 400 to 600 millimeters, in the center between 700 to 900, and at the slopes of Mount Hermon 1000 to 1300 millimeters, and more than 1500 millimeters on the peaks of the snow-covered Mount of Sheikh most days of the year. After 1948, the leaders of Israel sought to achieve the expansionist policies of the founding leaders of their Zionist movement. The Israeli forces violated the armistice agreements signed with Syria on the 20th of July 1949 and attacked the demilitarized zones. The Israeli forces managed to occupy the Golan in the June 1967 war. The Israeli occupation forces launched a policy of extensive ethnic cleansing against the Syrian inhabitants. Some 131,000 people were forcibly displaced and banned from returning to their places of residence. Later, they destroyed 340 villages and farms inhabited by Syrians who had been displaced, and built on its ruins 34 illegal settlements. Today, some 23,000 settlers. 5 Syrian villages, located on the slopes of Mount Hermon in the far north of the Golan, and inhabited by about 25,000 Syrian citizens, remained in the occupied Golan. According to data available, in 2008, the number of Syrians displaced by the occupation authority from the Golan is more than 400,000. IDP, Syria, 40 years have passed, and people who have been displaced from the Golan are still waiting.
The Syrian Arab Golan will remain Syria forever. There is no way to relinquish their legitimate right. The Golanians will wait for the moment when the Syrian Arab Golan will return to the homeland. Their Zionist enemy machine will never be able to remain in this spot. It is the land of Syria.